Thanks for tuning in to another solo episode with me, Nora Finch of Rock Your Life, the podcast. And this is going to be another one of my solo episodes, probably one of the most important ones of my life, just in general, even though I've only been doing podcasts for the past, several years, 2, 3, 4 years now. So, what I wanted to do in this episode is it's going to be part 1 of 2. The next one coming up is with Rocky Twitchell here from Sacramento, and he is fire prevention specialist, and we are going to talk about his experience with his former wife, who was a narcissist. And I wanted to give the background in case for those of you that are interested or want to know why I'm interested in this topic. And I'm going to discuss this here, one of the most intriguing personality disorders, which is narcissism to me. I didn't know much about it till later in life and would not have labeled my mom like this, but just what I ended up learning in life, I realized, yes. So she was not only had narcissism and possibly bipolar, and then developed more mental illness later on in her adulthood. I would probably say due to isolation and some other tragic things that happened, maybe almost to the verge of schizophrenia. So, and she passed a couple of years ago in Thailand. I was not there. So I've kind of had my own types of closure and maybe not complete closure yet. So maybe this episode will also, help me, help myself, and help others. So I've laid it out that I'm going to do my little intro that's a little bit long, but it is important for me to say. I'll give a little bit of my mom's bio and upbringing, then up into the point of meeting my dad, them divorcing, relocating, and my experience with her as a teen on summer visits, and then later on in adulthood, how the isolation and the mental illness came into play. And then I'm going to talk a little bit on healing in the different ways to do that without actually speaking with the person. Kind of making your own closure within yourself. And that starts by forgiving oneself. Okay, so moving forward, I just told you about this episode's going to be about my experiences that I can remember from about age 6, which aren't super dramatic, but from age 6 to about age 18, 12 to 18 is when I went on summer visits with my mom. And different stories and things I'll talk about are actually just passed down from my dad and then her remarried husband, my stepdad. Okay, so let's go ahead and now, just in general, I knew nothing about personality disorders growing up. I mean, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I was in some ways sheltered. Definitely not lots of different personalities. I wasn't close to any major cities. Baltimore, Maryland was actually the closest, and that was about an hour. So I lived in a small little area of Pennsylvania, kind of closer. You may have heard like where the Amish live, like Lancaster, that city. So it was called Stewartstown, Pennsylvania. So not growing up, learning about these sorts of things, I had always recognized narcissism as, I would say, somebody who is acting narcissistic, as, but not as a noun, meaning somebody is a narcissist. So I really didn't learn and start knowing a lot more about this and to my aesthetics career when I had a client who used to work at Folsom Prison, and she dealt with a lot of narcissists. So that's how that started there. Okay. So what I want to say, though, first off, my intention for this episode is that I hope this comes across clear, is that I want to help bring awareness to others who don't know this disorder exists. There's lots of different personality disorders out there, but I want to share my experience with this, and for some reason it keeps coming around in my life, so I think I do need to talk about it more. Okay, so narcissism, even though my mom had several other things, in some ways I do think she was conscious of her behavior and sometimes not. you'll hear it from different people all over the internet. Some people say that they are and that they aren't. My experience is, both. I think it really just depended. I don't know that she would, obviously consciously say I have a personality disorder, but yeah, she knew in some of her character traits, just that how she was as a person, and those things like manipulating. So this narcissistic abuse is more prevalent than we think. And it is something that I think needs to get out there. And specialist coach and mentor to me during my self-defense times, I'm going to, what do you call it, name drop him, because he is a very, very much a specialist in the subject matter, and all of his female exes were narcissists. So his name is Richard Grannon from the UK, and he is he calls himself the Spartan Life Coach. He used to be a former bouncer, and his accreditations in different types of psychology and all kinds of different things, like me, in terms of his interest there, and accreditations he has. Okay, so two, I want to help remind those of you out there, especially in the beginning, younger years of your life journey, that if you are looking to find a long-time partner, really try to take your time in getting to know somebody. I know we don't always like to hear those things because we get excited when it comes to love, but I think it's really important, especially if you're starting to see any sort of red flags. And I think just in general, people generally, if there is a lot of physical attraction, things tend to go very fast in the beginning, and that doesn't give you time. I think for to see all the odds and ends, and yes, it can take years, but definitely not the 9 months or 8 months. I think Rocky said with both of his relationships, and they moved in right away and almost got married like right away. So I think just in the excitement, and things like that, things can really, yeah, just go too fast. Okay. Thirdly, I want to explain about how American culture and its influence, like a lot of things I've talked about before, its influence, and money specifically, how this greed can bring out the worst in us. And this is what ultimately led to the breakup with my dad. It was basically the money, greed, all of that sort of stuff. Okay, the lies, the different things. So, number 4, how this experience validated to me what I already know, which is how important personal development is. And a lot of the times, just because you're pretty on the outside, it doesn't equally mean pretty on the inside. And this sort of thing ultimately affected my ability to accept myself as something physically beautiful, because of just feeling like that's all our country cares about. And that's also why I speak so much about the importance of self-worth building. Okay, so yes, she was very beautiful. She had only her looks actually to get by initially, because she had no education, no birth certificate, and I'll explain that more. Lastly, number 5, in learning to forgive myself, I also learned to have empathy for her. I was always empathetic and felt for people growing up, but when it came to her, I just was so angry, that I feel like I lacked the ability to have empathy for her, and it was kind of blinded by it. And for a long time, I actually wasn't sure if I could even say I loved her, and I felt so weird that it's like your own parent, my mom, like even thinking like that. And of course I do, because there is positive that she brought into my life. Not even necessarily the strength everybody talks about, but the Buddhism part. So learning to forgive her was about in my early 30s, and but most of my life I spent so much repressing, and I never was able to speak up to her. So actually, when I learned verbal assertiveness skills and how to do it in a compassionate way, I was able to voice it, to her. And that was the point. It really didn't matter her response. I didn't really know what to expect, but I was just glad that I said something. And all that I did say was that my feelings were hurt when she talked like that. And the interesting response after she paused was that it made you stronger, right? And I definitely was not expecting it. So for me, it created the peace to be able to say something. Clearly, she did not feel bad or wrong for anything she was doing. And I empathize with the fact she was just knowing what she knows how to do. And that's her. So now the bio. Condensed, a very interesting story. Her whole life up until the end, I think. So she was born in Thailand in the city of Ayutthaya, which is close to Bangkok. And both of her parents died at the age of 2 from leprosy. I believe she had one sister and one brother, but I'm not sure. I maybe met them but not very briefly, but not even introduced to them. And I wouldn't even know really what they look like. From the age of 14, she had her first son, and by 19 had 3 kids. One of them, I found out, was fathered by a Thai monk, which, as you might know or have heard of in that culture, like any cultures, like a priest or a pastor, that's not something that you do. So that is a very interesting part of that story too. But once again, I told you she was very beautiful, so I'm sure that temptation is what happened there. And there was no birth control going on, or people didn't tell her about it. So 3 kids, age 19. During this time, again, I don't know all the details of her story, and sometimes she would say things here and there. But during that time of her upbringing, I did hear her say people had tried to throw her in a fire. She tried to kill herself many times, and I'm sure lots of other horrible things that we don't really need to focus on. So my dad met her probably at around that time, 18 or 19, at the disco, he calls it, or in the nightclub. And he was stationed there in the Army for 18 months and basically swooped her off her feet. He didn't know she had 3 kids. He saw wherever it was that he went to visit her, there were kids in the room, but he didn't know that they were hers. Okay, so that's another interesting fun fact. So they began traveling the world, and he went to Iran and Germany. And during this time, my brother ended up being born. We're 8 years apart. My dad was gone a lot, but anyway, they ended up having him, who I later found out has some sociopathic tendencies. Okay, so they relocate to Sacramento here. This is where I live currently. And before I forget, the 3 kids she had later would come to the US in their 20s. I didn't meet them into their 20s. And I don't know when my dad found out that she had 3 kids. So, recap, I'm the last child, number 5. So, 3 kids, 3 kids with time in, and then the 4th, my brother, um, and I have the same parents. Okay, so 5 kids total. So when she came here, apparently she had been doing, my dad said, a little bit of gambling in Iran, but when she came back here, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. When she came back here, she started gambling with the women in the neighborhood, and basically they were telling her how much money she could get from, divorcing your husband, and she was gone a lot. And she started actually, going to Tahoe and Reno, and basically I was left at the babysitters all the time, or we were. So my dad didn't like that. And that's how things started. And basically, she started lying and making horrible accusations against him. And the cops showed up. And so, even all sorts of different sorts of accusations and violence and all things that are so just not like my dad. And basically, during that time of that divorce, the lawyer also was making up sorts of things too. Basically, it was a give me the house and I'll give you the kids, was her logic in there. So that's nice to know. That's like my mom is selling me. Okay, so speeding it up, after the divorce, we were relocated. So my dad ended up getting two of us, and we moved over to the East Coast. And I think we went right away to Pennsylvania, but my dad commuted to Baltimore every day, back and forth 2 hours. So that was my childhood from basically 6 or somewhere around there till 19 years old. And then my mom ended up relocating over there with my stepdad to Delaware. So that's where I would have the summer visits. Okay, so during that time, I'm going to touch on this briefly because I don't know that you really need to know this. The only parts that you need to know is my experience with her is that since I was punk rock, dressing a certain way and having short hair and these different things were not about, what she thought was beautiful. But basically, my summer spent, she was always ridiculing me, always saying, why don't you want to be pretty? Why you want to look like a boy? She was always complaining about how many kids she had and how many bills she had. And I just saw her behavior and just who she was as an ugly person. And so we did so I did back and forth summers. They owned a restaurant in Delaware that I worked at briefly, and I basically even asking myself the entire time, why do I keep going back? And it was really for my stepdad because we were really so close. And he's really a beautiful, loving person. And so during that time, I always, I knew during that time, and just I had to embrace myself anyway for feeling so different in Pennsylvania, that when I ended up going to see her and all that pretty and everything about being pretty, it kind of just made me more disgusted. So that ended up affecting me later in life, in terms of allowing myself to be pretty, because I just saw so many things from her that I didn't like. And women for that matter, just the whole thing affected my view of women and being pretty and everything. Okay, so that's for another show, me talking about my story through that physical body image issues and not feeling white enough. Okay, so back to my mom. So so I told you that I lived in Pennsylvania till 19, and then I lived with her shortly in Illinois after they were stationed. So this is from 19 to 22, and I was really never there. But during that time, she was very isolated. My stepdad was working all the time. She had no job. She used to do nails. The stereotypical story. She used to do nails and actually had friends, but in this situation of how long they were stationed there, um, she, yes, became isolated, and almost this is like the stages of going into schizophrenia, I believe. Just the beginning stages, a lot of talking to herself, and different things. And so over the years, basically, so now moving forward, um, I'm going to start losing track. It's between Illinois, and then they started traveling in a big rig. My stepdad started driving that across country. And somehow during that time, um, there were a lot of things going on, and I can't really tell you the order, but basically, it may have been truck driving and then going to Thailand, but basically, several things happened. This may have been then on one of her trips to Thailand, that basically my oldest brother, her firstborn, after he had 3 strokes, did eventually end up passing. Um, that is another story in itself. He really was tired of my mom asking him to do things, and he said that was another reason. I think he was just over life, doing life. After that happened, several years later after that, then my nephew, so her it's her second grandson, who actually was birthed. He had some problems coming out. And so he was already having a lot of problems from birth. And so I think so when he was 7 or 8, somewhere 7 or 8, he was staying at a school, and he ran away and drowned. He drowned in the rice paddies there. And so I know that wrecked her, even though she knew he wasn't going to be living very long. She actually had had a premonition of that. And then after that happened, then my sister, a few years later, I know that she was not herself, ended up developing a brain tumor, and she had surgery and is now still on medications and different things. Okay, so during that time, somehow she had a wound. My mom had a wound on her leg, and she would never let it heal, and she just kept putting tiger balm and alcohol inside of it. And she had it for a long time, several years. She refused medical care when my stepdad tried to bring her back to Seattle. And it was during that year she returned back to Thailand. Still not, it's not healing, it's not getting better. And I think really there towards the end, again, she developed a fever. I think it lasted for like almost a month. Something happened there. The details might be a little bit off. I'm sorry if the details aren't totally correct. But the point is, the fever, and then she ended up going into cardiac arrest. So they said basically sepsis is what did it. So I was not there for her and didn't get to see her, really didn't get to speak with her, but I made peace with at least saying, I think that I thought that I would be okay with not seeing her, and the next day she passed. So I don't know to say that is the right or the wrong decision that I made, but I did feel a little bit of guilt afterwards. I think depending, of course, on how close you are with the person, you're going to have a different sort of grieving experience. And again, maybe since I haven't really processed it in any sort of way, it still feels unreal. I am still supposed to be going back and getting her jewelry, or maybe I won't be going back for that reason, but that's another part of closure that might just be good for me. Having those sentimental items, which I have a few of them now, but I can just tell you that, yeah, when you don't have a close relationship, if it's parent or not, it's just kind of different. I still felt at peace. I still felt a little bit of guilt, but I also feel like because I haven't dealt with it, there's probably definitely still stored emotions in me and anxiety that's going to come out at some point. I don't like it that I missed the ceremony. I think that was it's a 3-day thing about in like Thai culture, like just to have been there to experience that. So to close, I know that was kind of a lot of information, and I think really what I want to say, that this is overall how I became interested in this topic matter, is that you really hear a lot more so in American culture about narcissism, and men who are more of like this, behavior and acting those sorts of ways towards women, and you rarely hear about a woman doing it. And I think it just needs to be put out there, and be, people do need to know about it because it does exist. It is prevalent, and maybe it will help some of us prevent getting in these situations, excuse me, where we see these red flags and we see these different behavior patterns in people, so we don't get wrapped up in these situations too much. Um, and also, I want to say that the average person can be hooked. And in the situations of both my dads, is I told you already that she was physically beautiful. So that already becomes some sort of hypnotic, just the whole thing is like you're under hypnosis. And I can speak from experience because I had this these situations with me growing up with the female friends that I had. And this is not from a gay perspective, in that of being gay and being attracted to them, but just again, wanting to feel, I'm not embarrassed to say, wanting to feel what it's like to get that attention that they were getting, which they weren't, but not only being friends with those people, it didn't help me. So when I talk about this hypnosis and getting involved with physically attractive people, that's the perspective I come from. So I take that in both situations of both my dads they're intelligent, good people, loving people, beautiful people. I'm advocates for them and other men that I've met in my life that have gone through these situations. So don't beat up on yourself if this is you. And again, me, see, I'm not even, this wasn't even me, but I know what it's like. I look back and I feel sad about the way that I felt about myself. Sometimes too, when I look at, like, you're like, oh, I'm smart. Like, I think I'm a smart person. Like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I attracted to this? Why am I putting up with this? Whatever questions, like, I'm so dumb, I'm so stupid. Whatever things, even fleeting thoughts might run through your mind. Um, or not. It's something to recognize. And I think the more that we are informed about people out there and that personality disorders exist, it's going to help us immensely. Okay. And so maybe we'll have some empathy for others that are in these situations. And you can experience this with bosses and coworkers and friends. Um, so I'm just very fortunate and would like to say that I am fortunate. I know I'm fortunate because my dad's second remarried wife, Filipino, she's the one who I grew up with from age 6 to 18, and she was a beautiful presence in my life. We weren't super close, but I think she fulfilled that role that I really needed, of somebody there all the time who was so beautiful and loving. And I ended up growing up with my stepsister till 8th grade. She was manic depressive, so she actually ended up going back to the Philippines, and then a brother. So they all live in Canada now. My dad is in Alabama with his fourth wife. And that's a funny situation too. It is true love. She is an old soul. They are, I don't even know to say, what, 50 years apart. Um, and so it wasn't going to work out in the beginning with them, but it ended up working out now. And then my stepdad is in Thailand. The oldest brother is in, my brother is, same parents. He is in Thailand. And the other two siblings are over there as well. So, and then I have a sister in Alabama. So basically, all these siblings, most of which I just told you are all halves, just one full, are all over the world, in the country. And yes, I don't know when I will be back. So I hope this answered some questions for you, that explained how I got into this disorder, thinking about this disorder that I find so intriguing. I think my mom might be the covert. I get them confused, but it's basically the one who appears like you'll see them always doing good things. Like, you think that they're being a good person, or they must be a really good person. They're giving money to people all the time. She was giving money to the nurses in the hospital when she was there. Like, she would do sorts of things like that. But on the other end, yeah, she was just very manipulative, ridiculing, all of the things you can think of in the book. And basically, as long as I can remember, from probably the age of 12 up until in my 30s and 40s, she continued to threaten my stepdad with divorce every single day of every moment. I can imagine he is, he's okay. He's remarried now, but traumatized, just from that type of talk. I can imagine what that is doing to somebody's soul and spirit. And so there's different reasons, right? People stay with somebody. Sometimes, I hear these different stories from people, I don't want to give them half, I don't want to leave them, there's kids. There's all these different situations. Everybody has their own path and their own reasonings. So let us not judge. And just hopefully we'll also be a lot more empathetic of those people that maybe are being abused. Maybe it is normal for them. Maybe it's something they're attracted to. Maybe that's, again, what it's their choice to be in those situations. So let's help them, allow them to learn on their own. Oh, I also forgot I was going to end this episode with, so forgiving. There's many different ways out there you might hear when it comes to forgiveness and how people do that. But for me, in a lot of my situations of just in general trying to forgive situations, and also just being an adult now, is I have a lot of different practices that I do with my intentional prayer. And what I wanted to share with you is that I told you that yes, I voiced with my mom. That was step number one. I think I did end up doing some, maybe, just some lighting of some candles and incense and things like that. I don't think I did any sort of energy work, because there's all these different things you may have heard me talk about, all these different types of practices and therapies for healing that don't involve talking. But one other beautiful one that I did before, and this actually had to do with another family member, who got in my face, and that goes into my self defense story, is writing a letter. So, writing a letter to the person, you've probably heard this before, you actually don't have to send it, because if you know the workings of the world, or you studied anything about energy psychology, and that also people are mirror images of us, just the act of you writing it out on a piece of paper is going to help provide healing. So after you write it out, you can burn it, you can bury it, you could, I don't know, put it in a container, and I was going to say send it down the river, but then the glass container would contaminate. Not the best for the environment, but there's different things that you can do. So, burying and burning. If you just keep it, that works as well. But the ways of doing those other sorts of, the burning and the burying, is a way of releasing. So the burning is more, that's where, when I do that, is actually, I feel it's better, to release like that. So the situation that I did with my other family member is, I did not say anything to him. Um, I'm sure I said something, but I kept it really minimal because I had already gone through my own healing process within myself. Um, so, burning, burying, just writing the letter out. Um, I said that you could keep it, put it in a special place to you, or you can send it, of course, right? So you just don't, not having the attention, it's so satisfying to not having any expectation that the person is going to say I'm sorry or anything like that, is so beautiful. And there's many things out there. I know it sounds a little bit confusing to talk about forgiving of yourself, but I really did have to forgive myself for being so angry at myself as a teenager and repressing and not speaking up to my mom. I mean, yeah, that's my mom. I respected her to a certain level, for birthing me, but I was really just so angry at me. Learning all those things about her, yes, gave me empathy for her situation to understand why she did what she did and acted like she did. But really, and so I was angry at her for that. But so that's that part there in forgiving of ourselves. So if you'd like to know more about these sorts of things, there are many books out there and different things, to study, and or if you just like to listen to my stuff, I can talk more, or I do talk more about these sorts of personal inner struggles. I just need to be posting more on YouTube. So I'm going to go ahead and end this now. Thank you so much for checking this out. I hope that you listened to it as part one. And part two is coming up, and I will meet you over there. Don't forget rockyourlifewithnorafinch.com. My Spotify, iTunes, Pandora, all of that. My full list of shows are on there. My video shows and first responder work, is on YouTube. Okay, so I will see you soon. Thanks for listening.